Putin's whole narrative of what Russia is, who Russians are, is completely wrapped up in Ukraine being part of Russia and Ukrainians and Russians being the same people. So that makes it really hard for him to compromise. Nevertheless, he's always been a pretty pragmatic guy. I'll go with in 3 years, the war is over.
Hey everybody, welcome to the future of GovCon. This is a weekly podcast to bring together experts from across the industry and look at what's happening today and how it's going to impact the future of our industry. I'm Jake Frazer. I'm the owner and CEO of Precision Talent Solutions. In leading one of the industry's top executive search firms, I get to talk to influencers every day. C-suite executives, board members, growth leaders, top government officials, military flag officers. And on this podcast, what we're doing is we're bringing in these experts from AI, from space, from medical, from logistics, from engineering. And we're sitting down and talking about what's happening in their specific area of the industry and how it will impact the future. So pour a cup of coffee and let's get started. Hey everybody, it's Jake. Welcome back to another episode of the future of GovCon. Russia. Everybody's talking about Russia, and we decided to do something about it. We're bringing on one of the preeminent minds and thought leaders around Russia. So today, as our guest, is a guy that I met 15 years ago and did a whole session with him. We're bringing on Andy Kuchins. Andy, thanks for joining the podcast.
Hey, Jake, it's great to reconnect with you and to join you on your podcast. I'm really looking forward to this.
So Andy and I met, 15 years ago. Last company we had, we were doing a lot up in Central Asia. And Andy was with CSIS, the Center for Strategic International Studies at the time. And we did a panel we brought on our GSA partners, and we did the whole thing on the modern Silk Road. And I got to spend some time with Andy. And I was like, this guy knows more about Russia than anybody you got to meet. And so we're going to tap into your brain today, Andy.
All right. We'll see what's left of it.
How do you know so much about Russia? Tell us about your resume a little bit in this area. Let's get you some credibility built up with the audience.
Sure. Well, I got excited about international relations when I was 13, when Richard Nixon and Henry Kissinger went to China and they started détente with the Soviet Union. I guess something I was especially interested in Kissinger was he kind of looked like my dad. He was kind of pudgy, curly hair, glasses, and he was dating all these Hollywood starlets. I was 13 years old. Like, what the hell's going on with this? And he forced me to go to the dictionary because he had this great phrase, power is the ultimate aphrodisiac. Power is the ultimate aphrodisiac. I met him, actually I knew him when he was on the board at CSIS, and I was in Beijing sitting next to him at a dinner about 10 years ago. And I said, Mr. Kissinger, Dr. Kissinger, a hero of mine and really an inspiration. But I have to ask you a question. Did you really say that power is the ultimate aphrodisiac? And he looked at me, he's 90 years old, a little twinkle in his eye, Jake. He said, I'm afraid I did. At any rate, that's when I got excited about international relations. 7 years later, or 5, 6 years later, I was a freshman at Amherst College, and I knew I was going to do international relations, and the Soviet Union was the big bad enemy at that time. And I got into Russian studies. I ended up being a Russian studies major, ended up doing a master's and a PhD, and worked in think tanks and top universities ever since. And I tell my students and a lot of others that are considering doing Russian studies that it's often like falling into a black hole, the black hole of Russian studies. Once you get in, you never come out. It's it's just such a fascinating place. The history and the culture and the people, they're just so interesting. I think that's kind of what's kept me in the game all these years. I remember my first trip to the Soviet Union was 2 days after the Soviets had invaded Afghanistan back in 1979, and everybody was saying to me, "Oh, Andy, what an interesting time to be going to Russia," and of course it was. Now, I've traveled to Russia more than 100 times since, and before every trip, people always say, "Andy, what an interesting time to be going to Russia."
It's
And it's
always
always
interesting.
true.
It's
Always
true.
true. There's always
Yeah.
something kind of crazy going on there, and so there you
Could you
have it.
go there today? Would they let you in?
They would let me in. I believe I could get a visa. But I haven't been for 5 years, which frankly, I'm kind of in a little
Missing it.
withdrawal being away so long. My wife is Russian, and she had to travel there quite a bit in the last 4 or 5 years because she had an ailing mother who finally passed away on July 4th. But, you know, I kind of have decided I haven't felt comfortable about the idea of going there at this point.
Yeah, I can understand. Well, if you recognize Andy's voice, maybe you've caught his podcast. I love meeting fellow podcasters. He has. I'm addicted to his podcast now. I started listening to it. He has a very cool podcast called Russia Decoded. Russia Decoded. It's on Spotify, all the places where you can find our podcast. So check it out. Russia Decoded. And the thesis for it is they watch the Russian news so you don't have to. Uh, why don't you talk a little bit about the podcast and what you're doing there, Andy?
Well, thanks, Jake, for giving me the opportunity to giving the podcast a plug. I'm having a lot of fun with it. I have a partner that I do it with, Chris Monday, who's an economist, an American economist, but he's based in South Korea. And one thing that attracted me to Chris is when I we wrote a series of articles a few years ago about succession possibility candidates after Putin, and I learned that he'd watched Russian news every day for the last 30 years.
Wow.
So it's
Okay.
like, "Whoa, he's out there." Um, but the idea for the podcast that came up with, this fall, we're kind of old school. We're really more like Kremlinologists. We believe that, it matters who's in what position, who's doing what Putin says. I don't like, for example, this term Putinism that so many of my colleagues use because I think it's kind of tautological. It's like, what is Putinism? It's what Putin says and does. Well, let's just focus on what he says and does and call it that. But really to pay attention to details. Russia is traditionally a very non-transparent society. Always has been. I joke, what happens in the Kremlin stays in the Kremlin. And they've always been good at obfuscating and providing a lot of disinformation, a lot of distractive noise, for the naive Westerners to kind of suck up on. So, and we think that particularly in the Russian state news, which of course is propaganda, but most news is propaganda, to be honest, in my view. Uh, we think there are a lot of messages that are being sent. Mainly the messages are being sent to the Russian people, but we think it's also how the Russians are looking to present themselves to the world, and as well as send some messages to the world. So that's basically the premise of it, and we've been doing it weekly. And we just recorded our last episode on Monday night,
Yeah.
of which was, I guess, March 9th.
Very cool. I mean, the past couple episodes, he's looked at, is Iran an asset or liability to Russia? What's going on there? He covered the Munich security conference from a few weeks ago, and what does that mean from a Russian lens? So check out the podcast, guys. If you're interested in the world and foreign policy, Andy has a fantastic show there, and you learn a lot. You're a senior fellow at the Center for National Interest, and you're also an adjunct professor at Johns Hopkins SICE, the Center for my brother got his master's there, Center for
Oh, the Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies.
that's right, yes. Great programs, both. Um, and, you could say that, a lot of people know a lot about Russia, but, um, you have the podcast, you've been studying the space for a long time, and today, what's going on in the world? Russia seems to be in every conversation when it comes to foreign policy. If you talk about China, you talk about Russia. You talk about Iran, you talk about Russia. Um, is Russia more important now than it's ever been in terms of its impact on what's going on in the world?
Good question. Um, I don't think it's more important than it was during the Cold War, when it really was a peer competitor. to the United States, and we were competing, toe to toe all over the world, vying for influence and power. But it has been it's remarkable the remarkable recovery that's taken place since Vladimir Putin came to power, and I regard him as an extremely competent politician. And how he is, I'm not making any moral judgments. I'm just, if we look at where Russia's position is in the world today, as you were alluding to Jake, and I agree with you. Russia is involved in virtually every conversations about every place in the world, and especially, of course, right now in Europe with the Ukraine war and Iran, but also elsewhere. I mean, they were you're looking at Venezuela and Cuba. Russia is a player there, and while they may look to be kind of down, they're not out. It's always dangerous to count Russia out, and I think that we, the United States, mainly. Uh, Made a big mistake, in the 1990s when Russia was at one of its, I call, one of their historical low points, one of their times of troubles, like in the 16th, 17th century, the turn of that, right during the Bolshevik Revolution and the Civil War in the 1920s. And um, uh, I remember there's a great story or anecdote. A group of us was briefing Admiral Mike Mullen shortly before a trip he was taking, I think in 2000, about 2007, 2008 to Russia. And he introduced the conversation by saying, going back to 1992, when he led a U.S. naval delegation to Severodvinsk, the Russian nuclear submarine base in the north. And they were up. I guess they were. There was the last night there. They had a big party. There was a lot of vodka that was drunk. They're watching the sunrise, and he was sitting next to the wife of his counterpart on the Russian side, and she said to him, uh, "We'll be back. We'll be back." In 1992. And, I kind of always had that feeling about Russia then as well, and that understanding how it had several times like a phoenix rising from the ashes. It seems to its resilience is extraordinary, and so I think that the vast majority of people are surprised, who are looking out, let's say in 1997 and 1998 at, just how quickly Russia recovered. I think the Russians in some respects were surprised about that, and where they are today.
I mean, I'm gonna say it, it's gonna sound terrible, but Russia's like Snoop Dogg, it just doesn't go away, you know? Continues to be relevant, continues to be in the news.
It does.
Okay, I'm a big Snoop
Who
Dogg
would have
fan, so
expected Snoop Dogg to be one of the main announcers on
yeah.
NBC for the
Hey,
Winter
the
Olympics?
Olympics, right? Okay,
And he was
I wanna
good.
I wanna go into, I wanna look at Russia through the lens of a lot of things going in the world, but before that, and you've touched on it, but you've had a fascinating career, been to Russia 100 times. Just talk a little bit about your career path, and particularly, I know you've gotten involved with DoD, which is now DOW, of course, but you've gotten involved also in the industry side and some of the economic development pieces. Talk about your career path. You spent some time in Bishkek. Uh, any crazy stories you want to throw in? Go ahead. Not too many.
Okay.
Not too many.
I got a few pretty crazy ones.
I bet.
It's like the Chinese curse, may you live an interesting life. Um, so I was always interested in kind of, you know, um, combining the public sector, the private sector, and academia. So guys like George Shultz, Bill Perry, who reached heights in all three of those sectors, they were kind of role models for me. Although it's true, when I was 13, I decided I did want to be Secretary of State. Um, that hasn't exactly panned out. So I never applied for a tenure track tenure track position. Right after I finished my doctorate, I defended it was 1992, and I wanted to get involved in the revolution in a more hands-on way, and I ended up taking a position with the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation to found and develop a program to support scientists, researchers, and academic civil society it's sort of independent, policy entrepreneur types. Did that for about 5 years, and then went back to Stanford for another gig. That then came out to Washington. I did my master's and PhD at SAIS in Washington, and I ended up spending the next 15 years in think tanks. 7 years at the Carnegie Endowment, running their Russia Eurasia program, including 3 years running their Carnegie Moscow Center in Moscow from 2003 to 2005. Um, and then joined CSIS, Center for Strategic International Studies, in 2007. And one of the reasons I wanted to join CSIS, CSIS was because CSIS has much more interaction with the private sector. They raise about 35% of their operational budget. I'm not quite sure what the number is today, from the private sector, and I really enjoyed my interaction with the private sector, and including that was an opportunity. And when I met you, um, I did take a little bit of a detour from Russia in 2009, 2011. Um, I got involved in Afghanistan, and I joked at the time that, well, Russia's proving to be too hard of a problem to solve, so I'm going to try to do Afghanistan, and
Oh,
um,
yeah. It's an
and that
easy
was
one.
really fun. We got involved with the Northern Distribution Network project that we
Mhm.
ran there, and that turned into a modern Silk Road project, which is when I met you. And then also, then that developed into another project, Eurasia Reconnecting, which is the kind of the concept of that. It's one I carry with me today, and is uh, a big part of my work at the Center for the National Interest, is that the supercontinent of Eurasia is reconnecting. There had been a kind of a hole in the middle, and the hole in the middle where there was very little connectivity. When there's very little connectivity, then there's bad governance. There's drug trafficking, human trafficking, and a lot of bad things happen. Um, but it's been filling in. But to understand what actually is going on, you really have to look at it. I hate this word. I don't care for it. Holistically,
Holistically, yeah.
um, um, because the problem is that you have European experts, you have East Asia experts, you have South Asia experts, you have Russia experts, blah blah blah. Uh, but if but it's hard to get the comprehensive picture of what is going on, in a place that's really dynamic. During the Cold War, the Soviet Union, China until the late 1970s, and India until the middle 1990s, they weren't really engaged that much in trade and commerce as they would be. I mean, the three biggest players, in addition to Europe, and that's changed dramatically. Um, the emergence of the new states of the former Soviet Union, and so to me, that's a really cool thing to look into, and it's been especially interesting this year. This has been a great year for Central Asian U.S. relations. Um,
They just had a big
uh,
delegation at the White House, didn't they?
they did. In fact, the Uzbek President Mirziyoyev and the Kazakh President Tokayev, they've been to Washington 3 times, in the last 7 or 8 months. They were both there for the inaugural Board of Peace meeting, last month. So, that's something that's kind of animated me, and that it goes along with, that's sort of the Eurasia piece of my Russia and Eurasia work, if you will. Um, I did have the opportunity to meet Putin about a dozen times, pretty up close and personal, as a member of the Valdai discussion club.
How's his
For
handshake? Is it a
It's weak,
steel
it's
grip?
limp, it's not good,
Is it
it's not good. No,
wet,
no.
cold?
Yeah, a little clammy, a little clammy.
Ooh. He looks
Yeah,
like it,
yeah,
yeah.
I definitely sussed in on that.
You met
Um,
Putin a dozen times, like, what's have you had, like, conversations with him or just shook hands or
no, there were, for the first 10 years, the meetings, when we would meet with them, be for 3 to 4 hours, and typically there were like 35 or 40 of us around a table where we're being served this sumptuous multi-course meal with all kinds of liquor, and Putin is meeting us with with no aid. He has no notes, and we could ask any question we wanted. And so, people would think about their questions for a year in advance to try to trip him up. Well, let me tell you, Jake, he's a very hard guy to to play gotcha with. He has, I think, if not a photographic memory, then very close there too. He certainly remembers faces and people. Always a good quality for a politician as well as an intelligence officer.
KGB officer? Huh.
Yeah, he's parlayed, I think, some of the tools that he developed as a KGB officer that have helped him, as a politician. I guess my best story with him is actually how he kind of, uh, really saved my ass one time, back in 2008. Do you have a minute or 2 for this, or do you wanna
Do it,
move on to
yeah.
something else? Okay.
He's never
It's a
saved
pretty
my
good
ass,
story.
so
So in 2007, everybody was wondering, like, what's okay. Putin was his second term was coming to an end. Constitutionally, he was not allowed to run for the second term. What was he going to do? Was he going to change the constitution, or who was going to replace him? And everybody was wondering about that. And I was also thinking about a project of kind of looking hypothetically into Russia in the next 10 years. What could happen? And, the other guy and, I was it turned out that our president at the time, George W. Bush, was also thinking about this. And I got commissioned, by through the National Intelligence Council, to write a report on alternative futures of Russia to 2017.
okay.
And, when I was at CSIS, and the client was essentially, POTUS. So I did this kind of think tanky like project, and half of the report was sort of standard, social, economic, political, external factors. But in the second half of the report, I created these hypothetical scenarios, and the biggest vulnerabilities at the time I saw for Russia, and I'd say they're still the two biggest vulnerabilities are vulnerability to oil price fall and an over centralization of power in one person. And so, in one of the scenarios, I decided to take out that person, and it starts with uh, Putin walking out of Christ the Savior Cathedral mass, and he gets shot. It's called a shot in the dark. He's assassinated. Um, and it kind of goes into all the sort of throws up all of the succession plans in the air, and I go on with it. Now, I was quite happy with the report. The client was happy with the report, and I got permission from the intelligence community to publish it in open sources as a CSIS report. Sorry, there's a little bit of shaggy dog story, but I'm bringing us to a conclusion quickly. It was supposed to come out on December 13th, 2007. Well, what happened on December 10th, 2007? That was the day that the four parties nominated Dmitry Medvedev to be basically to be the next president of Russia. On December 11th, the big news, the headline above the fold was Medvedev says Putin would be ideal prime minister. And then on the 13th, the huge headline in Kommersant, one of Russia's sort of, it's like like a New York Times at the time, big headline: American experts predicts assassination of Vladimir Putin.
Oh,
And
man.
of course, I was the American suspect
Yeah.
expert. And
Yeah.
what had happened was, the correspondent for Kommersant, this guy named Dmitry Sidorov, I've never seen since. He's kept out of my way, which is a smart thing on his part. Um, he wanted to get a copy of the report in advance, and I gave him that, and I said, Dimitri, you can't release your story until December 13th because the report's embargoed, and that's when we're releasing it." He agreed to that, and before the day before, we got together for a coffee, and we're talking about this and that. And finally, I said, "Well, Dimitri, what'd you think about the report?" And and he just looked at me. He said, "January 8th, 2008." And immediately, my situational awareness was so bad, I didn't immediately grasp what he was saying. And then I did. Like, holy, you know what? That is your main takeaway, the assassination attempt on Vladimir Putin. And then the guy looks at me right in the eyes, and he says, "Andy, I'm not a good guy." Someone looks across the table at you ver
Yeah.
2 feet away and says, "I'm not a good guy." You can pretty much count they're not a good guy. And so I started getting phone calls at midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, and one of them was from, an old friend, Igor Zevalov, who worked for RIA Novosti, which was the RIA Novosti at the time was the organizer of the Valdai Discussion Club. And of course, I had seen Putin at September, a few months before, and they're asking like, "What the hell is this? Who is this guy?" And I know it was, this is coming right from the Kremlin. I mean, Igor didn't get the call from Putin himself, but he got that call, I think, from his press secretary at the time, Gromov, and Putin certainly knew about it. And to make a long story short, they gave me a podium to defend myself in the Russian media right away. And I gave an interview for RIA Novosti, and then later in the day, I spent an hour talking in Russian on Echo Moskvy, their leading radio station, to basically explain that this article in Kommersant is a distortion of the report. It was a hypothetical scenario, blah, blah, blah. So, uh, c and as you can imagine, I was really angry, partly at myself for being so sort of naive in a way, but, afraid, afraid
I
for my
bet.
career,
Yeah.
afraid for my life, afraid
Yeah.
for my family, but the Kremlin came to my rescue.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, you're still
May you live
here.
an interesting life.
Yeah, you live an interesting life. So now we got you here. I want to kind of break the mold. I want to rapid fire some stuff at you. All right. And our community here are government contracting executives. And of course, they all want to see in the future. They all want to know what's going to happen. And uh, through the lens of Russia, let's talk about some key markets, some key areas of the world. And I want you to prognosticate briefly because I want to hit about six of them. Um, so first and foremost, the ones that's on everybody's mind is Ukraine. And I want you to walk ahead the next 12, 24, 36 months. And based upon what you know from the Russian perspective and history and the situation, how do you see things playing out in Ukraine?
Boy, uh, okay. My first thought, 4 years ago, February 24th, 2022, when the Russians started the full-scale invasion was, that, uh, Putin was destroying 2 countries simultaneously with somewhat different ways. The second thought was, I didn't think that either side had the, military wherewithal to achieve victory on terms that either would accept as victory. And so I really had a hard time seeing how this would end. Now, was I thinking that 4 years later we would be in a war of attrition where tremendous losses on both sides, especially the Russian side, and virtually microscopic territorial gains for Russia, but sort of a battle of the Marne, World War I type scenario? No, I don't think I could have foreseen all of that, but I wouldn't say it's particularly surprising. Now today, and of course, Iran has kind of upset things for a bit, but let's I'm thinking of where we were 2 weeks ago in the midst of the negotiations. Um, Putin's really stuck. I think his ideal scenario was a decapitation of Kiev and taking out Zelensky in the first week, kind of what we did with Maduro in a way, and kind of what we've done with Ali Khamenei. Um, and it's got to be very, very sobering and disconcerting to him about how effective we have been in those two actions, at least so far. Um, he can look. Russia has deep resources of resiliency, and so it really bothered me all the time. Hearing Joe Biden and the Biden administration, talking about how they would bring the Russian economy to their knees, and I just didn't think he really had a clue actually about uh, how difficult this task would be, and how ready the Russians would be to accrue huge losses. Now, I was surprised, and I think everybody in the world was surprised at how incompetent in the first 6, 9 months the Russians were militarily, making really gross mistakes. But it kind of reminded me of the beginning of World War II, where the Nazis were completely mopping them up. And then they started learning and adjusting and getting more equipment through lend lease, et cetera. And eventually the war turned around. So I expected the Russian performance to improve, but I still didn't understand how they could win. Okay, back to where we are today. Are we looking okay, if we're looking 3 years in advance, I'll go on
Yeah,
a
let's
limb,
do 3.
Jake, and
Yeah.
say that the war is over. There's somehow been a resolution. And I don't exactly know how long that is gonna take. So far, Mr. Putin has not evinced, um, directly or publicly any, readiness to make, to back off of his demands. Um, the Ukrainians have shown some willingness, I think, to make some territorial concessions. I think there is a deal to be had, and I do hope very much that the deal will come sooner rather than later. Um, but that the sticky part of this, Jake, is that well, Putin threw in all his marbles into this, everything, and he's completely and it's been tremendous. I think a big reason for him doing this was to fully consolidate his authority into perpetuity, which it has done very, very effectively. You got that big boost with Crimea in 2014.
Right.
You know, the Kremlin does polling all the time on what people are thinking, and I don't think they were surprised that they would get a big boost with a very successful operation in Crimea, and they kind of went from there. But I mean, he has actually one of my students wrote a great article that came out in the National Interest a couple of days ago, and it's about essentially how Putin's whole narrative of what Russia is, who Russians are, is completely wrapped up in Ukraine being part of Russia and Ukrainians and Russians being the same people. Um, uh, and if he so it's that makes it really hard for him to compromise. Nevertheless, he's always been a pretty pragmatic guy. Anyway, I'll go with in 3 years, the war is over.
Okay. So then let's talk about NATO and its relationship with Russia. Has NATO changed? Have we added member countries? Have we dropped member countries? And what is the relationship with Russia?
Um, okay. Just maybe backtrack briefly because it's to me it's important. Most people focus on the expansion of membership, which expansion of membership was consistently for 35 years been an extremely difficult issue for the Russians. Everybody of every political stripe has been opposed to it. But the expansion of mission has been at least as disconcerting for the Russians. And it starts with the war in Serbia in 1999, and the Russians actually feeling vulnerable that possibly NATO could take action against them for the war, violations of human rights in the war in Chechnya. That's so it's just important to keep that in mind. If the um, if the war in
You're saying
Ukraine
like that
does
when the defensive alliance leaves its borders to go take proactive actions, right?
yes,
Like
like
Kosovo,
taking out Muammar
like
Gaddafi in Libya,
like ISAF even, right?
like
Leaving
ISAF, yes,
yeah.
yes. These run, uh, you know, I, NATO still calls itself a defensive alliance, but it's hard for me to believe that. It's hard, certainly, it's impossible for the Russians to believe it, given that we've undertaken these out of area activities. Those are those don't look like defensive actions, I think, to most of the world, especially those that are not allied with the United States. Um, so
Does he go into a NATO country within the next 3 years?
I'm very skeptical of that. Very skeptical of that, and that's why I emphasize whenever I talk about the Ukraine war is just how unique Ukraine is for Russia. And Mr. Putin is a completely traditional, conservative, traditional, nationalist, imperialist leader. You know, Gorbachev and Yeltsin were the exceptions. Putin is pretty much like all the rest going back to the 14th century. Um, so, uh, and territorial security is, being a continental empire is so essential. I mean, so the idea of, you know, uh, of a military alliance, one that was initially created basically to contain the Soviet Union, to contain Russia, as the Russians see it. You know, we try to tell them that this is a oh, that's zero sum thinking. This is not a danger to you. The Russians go, that's just nonsense. We don't.
Yeah,
That's
it's hard to
total
believe.
BS. They'll never believe that. I mean, do you guys really believe that?
Yeah. Do you think NATO's intact 3 years from now as is today?
I do think NATO is intact 3 years from
Yeah.
today. That takes us
Including the
neatly kind
US,
of to
including Canada, including
yes, I
Hungary.
do.
Okay.
I do.
Okay.
I do. But I think what is principally going on with Trump's policies is that there's a restructuring, there's a rebalancing of burden sharing in the alliance, and it's way overdue. I think we talked about this, and we talked a couple of weeks ago in preparation for the podcast. Was you see this as NATO 3.0?
That's it. Yeah. We said it before
But
Secretary Colby put out his thing even. So, yeah,
yeah,
I think it's a stronger NATO in 3 years because I think the Europeans got their feet
yes.
underneath them, and the US is not as I mean, they're involved, but they're not as heavily involved, but they could get involved if they need to, right? But there'd be
I
less need to
personally quite
because the
like
European
the national security strategy and the national security
Okay.
document. I think that our previous documents for the last 35 years were very, very unrealistic in the goals of being able to fight two major wars simultaneously. And on top of that, the Europeans have been extremely irresponsible in not adequately investing in their own capacity to defend themselves. And
but they could argue they were
uh,
in Afghanistan, So
well, they were in Afghanistan, and that was I would have sound like the Trump administration. That was nice. Personally, I saw the wars in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq is huge mistakes.
I think everybody says that in hindsight. I mean, my brother served in both, and he says, "What was
Well,
that about?"
it's no critique of people who served in the wars. I mean, if you're in the military, then you
That's
have
right.
orders, and that's what you do. but the political leadership can have decisions to make. And even the Afghan war, I just don't think that we needed a land war in Afghanistan to fight a war on terror.
No.
And I pretty much thought that back in the beginning, but is in the and yeah, as you know, I got involved in Afghanistan policy, but I was kind of thinking like, how do you make a lemonade out of lemons? How do you make a silk purse out of a sow's ear? And I really thought that the Iraq War was a totally unnecessary war.
So
But
let's go back. So
those are
let's go
just
to the Middle
personal
East.
opinions.
We talked Ukraine, we talked NATO. Let's go to the Middle East. I can't remember if it's the NSS or which document. The only Middle Eastern country named was Iran, and here we go. We're in there, for better or worse. What's Russia? Let's look 3 years ahead now. What's Russia's relationship? They lost Bashar, who's I guess living in a condo somewhere outside Moscow. And, now they've lost one of their principal partners with Iran, or I don't know if they've lost them, but it's been certainly reconfigured. The deck has been shuffled. What happens? What's I know you can't predict what's gonna happen in the Middle East. Hell, nobody can, but what is Russia's relationship with the Middle East 3 years from now?
I think they're in a difficult position. Obviously, a lot depends on what happens in Iran, but I think that their influence, the special relationship they have with Iran, has been seriously degraded, and I think it's certainly not going to. I don't see it being, where it was, a month ago, being back to that in 3 years. I think that. Uh, the Russia, just by virtue of geography, I mean, Russia's always had a major interest in whether it was Persia or Iran, and it will continue to do so because of its interest in the South Caucasus, its interest in Central Asia. So Russian influence is not going to go away, but they my expectation or my hope slash expectation, but we'll call it the expectation for the purposes of your exercise, is that the United States is going to have a much more positive relationship with Iran, and also Russia's not only getting hurt in Iran, but it's getting hurt throughout the Middle East,
Yeah.
the Chinese as well. And everybody was making such a big deal 10 years ago when Russia, after a successful military engagement in Syria and their efforts to improve their relationships, throughout the Middle East, and a lot of that was them kind of taking advantage of what I saw as our mistakes. I was very critical of our policies in the Middle East post so-called Arab Spring, and they move right in. And uh, but now, I mean, particularly with Iran's attacks on the other Gulf states, that has pushed them that much more closer to the United States,
Yeah, that's that's
and
that's the
think
hard
I
part to
don't think that's going to
understand.
get forgotten.
Yeah,
Sorry.
and Russia's associated with that, right? So,
Yes.
that's not good. We got 2 more to go. China. What is Russia's relationship with China? They've kinda been the mistress for some time now of China. Um, how bad does China need Russia, and what does it look like 3 years from now? And we got one more after this, so leave a couple of
Okay.
minutes with that.
Yeah. Yeah. Sino-Soviet relations was my dissertation topic, and
Okay.
Sino-Russian relations has kind of been my hobby. But Russia's in an extremely ahistorical position, it being so leveraged by China and had been so alienated from Europe. And I find that an extremely unnatural and a very, very, very suboptimal position for Russia. And one of the great benefits, of course, if the Ukraine war can be resolved, is that Russia can then once again, and it'll take time, but it can once again start to reknit economic and commercial relations, especially with Europe, and political relations, and be able to rebalance and give itself more leverage vis-a-vis China. Um, the Chinese have been very, very effective and assiduous in kind of buying out Russia for
Yeah.
the last
Yeah.
20 years.
Kind of pushing them toward you push them towards these bad decisions, I'm sure, because they're gonna benefit.
Yeah.
That's a podcast in itself, but I have to and so the last one, the obvious one, 3 years from now, what's the Russian-US relationship look like?
I think it's going to be better. I mean, again, if okay, I sort of tip my cards right off the bat in saying that the Ukraine war is going to be resolved. And if that's the case, then and this is a big part of the whole Trump administration play with Ukraine. It is in part to help to pull Russia a little further from the grip of the Chinese. But while simultaneously, they're also, Trump is going to China later this month. Putin cannot be happy about that.
No, hell
It,
no.
the chances of Putin, excuse me, of Xi and Trump, whether they what making decisions that kind of leave Russia a little bit out in the cold, he's gotta be nervous about that. So, this whole kind of triangular relationship, I just see it being more fluid, than what it has been for the last few years.
Okay. All right. Well,
And
I've
that'd be a benefit to everybody, maybe except China.
kinda put you in the box on several topics. We step back, so war over in Ukraine in some form, NATO intact, stronger, um, Russia less influential in the Middle East, uh, China, kinda has Russia over their knee right now, and but a better relationship with the US. Sounds to me like a difficult situation for Russia, but somehow they always, this guy Putin, he always seems to be like 3 moves ahead of everybody else, and, it'll be interesting to see how far ahead he's thinking through all these different scenarios and what he's gonna do about it.
What I've always been, impressed with Putin is how effective he is at making lemonade out of lemons.
Yeah.
And he's very, very good at kind of calculating the battlefield, so to speak. And, okay, this can happen, that can happen, that can happen. How do I make any of these scenarios work for me? And I think it's how he's managed himself domestically, and I think it's how he managed things in foreign policy. It's not to say he hasn't made mistakes. He's made some big mistakes, but he manages. And I do think that he'll still be the president of the Russian Federation in 3 years.
That was my last question.
And okay. And if he's not, then I think it's going to be I don't think it's actually gonna be someone of his generation. I think they're gonna pull someone from the next generation, but the policy outlook will be very similar.
Mike Howard, lieutenant general, retired type, now the CEO of ISOA, told me, "We don't want who's second in line or third in line behind Putin." I mean, it's the devil you know in some instances, right?
Yes. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I do really applaud, President Trump for sticking with this effort at peace now for more than a year.
Yeah.
I mean, I think most people thought, well, he's going to get distracted, he's going to lose interest. But uh, I think that at least where the I think the Iran war is going to give him some more leverage with uh, with
Yep.
with Vladimir.
Well, let's hope so. Andy, we could talk forever about this. We could break each of those up and do a separate, discussion, and I love your perspective and your experience and the way you can tie it all together. Give me your one word that talks about your gut feeling about the future in these kind of in let's just talk about Russia and the relations with Russia and their place in the world. What's your one word?
Russia challenging. It'll always be challenging. Uh, it will never be easy, but So you said one word. I'll go with challenging.
Okay. That's a
I thought
that's
I thought I
good.
thought I thought you were gonna give me a question more about, NATO and European security, and my word was gonna be robust,
Okay.
um,
Robust is good.
because
Yeah.
because I think that, I think the alliance will survive, and it would actually be on much more, I think, robust grounds with, the Europeans in a stronger position to defend themselves as they should be. Putin has always joked about Europe that they're just our vassal, they're our vassals. It's an overstatement, but um, it's not a healthy relationship ultimately for the Europeans or for us.
Yeah. Fantastic. Folks, hope you enjoyed discussions with Andy. Like I said, if you want to hear more, go dial into his podcast. It's addictive just to sit there and just listen and break down the Russian news and translate it. That's Russia Decoded, the podcast. So check out Andy's podcast. He's also a musician. We may have to get together when I'm in DC next time, and he plays some harmonica and sings, which is two things I don't do very well. So that could be cool to get together. But Andy, thanks for coming on the show. It's so good to see you again.
So great, Jake. Thank you very much. It's great to hook up, and yeah, or maybe I'll come to Switzerland
Come on,
and gig with your band. That would be
come on.
awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
All
We
right.
played last night. So, hey, everybody, thanks for tuning in. Hopefully you enjoyed this. I mean, what a great view on Russia, and it's important. It's important to our industry. It's important to our government. It's important to our foreign policy. So, getting this kind of perspective is just gold dust. Uh, Hope you tune in next week. We got a great guest coming on. And remember, the future of GovCon is happening today. So tune in next week. All right. So thanks for joining me on another episode of the future of GovCon. I hope you enjoyed today's conversation and some of the bold predictions. If you did, take a second, share it on your social media, subscribe on YouTube. If you have any ideas for future guests or topics you'd like to have covered, hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm always there. And you can always learn more about precision talent solutions at pts.careers. Look forward to seeing you next week on our next episode.